Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Carla Nappi, and this is Carrie Jenkins. And we are here just to kind of introduce the site, introduce the project that brought us here, and let you get to know a little bit about us before we kind of start throwing all kinds of stuff at you. So we thought we would, we thought
Will
we'd
do.
start exactly, which we will do. So we thought we'd start by saying a little bit about who we are, what we're doing here, what brought us here, and what we hope to kind of get out of this moving forward, and what we hope we can do together with you moving forward. So with that,
Yeah.
Carrie,
So
would you
maybe
like
it's
to?
worth saying like just like where we are in physical space. So I'm in Vancouver at the moment. I am
Mhm,
working at the University of British Columbia as a philosophy professor.
mhm.
And
And I
conversation via Skype because
exactly. So we're on Skype because I am in Pittsburgh. I used to live in Vancouver and I used to work at UBC until about a month and 3 days ago. And now I work at
yum.
University of Pittsburgh. Yeah, I know. Cheers.
Cheers.
Pittsburgh. So
So
now
you
I'm a
have
history
a
professor, working in
fancy
the history
schmancy
department here.
titled history professorship.
Well, and you have a fancy schmancy Canada Research Chair. So yeah, we're doing
We're all
okay.
on fancy. I'm pretty okay. But so what we really want to convey here is that the whole idea behind this work that we're doing is in some ways poorly contextualized by starting off with the institutions that we work for, or perhaps it's not. It's part of it, but the point of what we're doing has a lot to do with moving beyond what I think that we've both come to experience as the limitations of those kinds of institutions. Which is why I find it really hard to know how to introduce this or myself or us or what we're doing without mentioning the institutions first. But then I immediately want to add we are responding, reacting, critiquing, etc. our positions within those. Does that make sense?
That's right. Totally. And in fact, the project that really brought us here and that kind of spurred the whole creation of the Invisible College, I think really came for both of us from a sense of unease, a sense of discomfort with the institutional structures we were living and working in. And I think for anyone who is like in academia at any level right now, as a student, as a professor, as a, anything within that, life and work becomes so enmeshed that when you're feeling a kind of discomfort with what's happening institutionally, that becomes so overwhelming in a way that maybe it's not if you're in a business, if you're a kind of person that can really firmly separate the two. And I think, at least for me, I am not a separate the two kind of a person. I'm a like, they're the same thing kind of a
Yeah.
person. So,
I mean, I think that's
mhm.
something that I mean, it's a very kind of double-edged thing, at least for me, because certainly being encouraged to regard my identity as bound up in my profession and my, being a philosophy professor, um, that's something that's been um, potentially damaging, I think, to my self-conception as open to more than just that, and to rejecting some parts of what that might look like that are sort of handed to me as the normal philosophy professor type of person. Um, and this idea that as a scholar, as an academic, one should really be that thing and not just do it, comes with its own bundle of risks. On the other hand, now that I'm kind of moving into a way of approaching my identity as a scholar slash artist, who does all kinds of work under those headings, I also find it impossible to extricate those from myself or myself from those. And actually, now that you're saying that, I think I started my book What Love Is by saying something like I'm a philosophy professor and I'm also a human, and those are not separable necessarily. Those are kind of parts of the same being, right? The same entity.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I tend to be kind of a utopian, and there's like nothing I can do about that. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good or productive thing. So that for me, also
we're good
coming,
balance because I'm a terrible pessimist, like about everything always.
and I'm like, let's just change everything. And so for me, also,
I'm just like, no, it'll only make it worse.
I know, and I'm like, let's just transform the world.
Cheers.
So coming to cheers, let's just transform the world. So
can't be any worse than this one.
So also kind of coming to the slow, not easy realization that for me, kind of scholar artist is very much who I am, and trying to live life as a thinky person or as a scholar, as an art practice. That's very much where I am. My response to the kind of and really how I feel about the mismatch between what feels like it's expected of me as a professor of history, right? And what I have internalized in terms of my training and what I feel is my work and part of my work. When I feel a mismatch, my impulse is, well, let's just change what it is to be a history professor, right? Like if the poetry and the fiction and all that and doesn't fit, and we can talk about this now or another time. I've been there are lots of instances where very clear signals have been sent that might not fit. Then I want to just change what the category can encompass. And so I think that's very much where the symposium project kind of came from, right? So
yeah, I mean, and sorry to just to kind of second that. It's exactly where it comes out of for me, at this sense that like scholar artist is a category that should exist, that it should be kind of accepted as one of the normal categories, that there should be a place within institutions, within universities for this kind of work. And it's actually very rare to see it welcomed, regardless of how much an institution might say they welcome that or want that. When it hits them, when the when you're actually producing in a way that doesn't fit into the categories that scholarship is expected to fit into, and the ones which are rewarded and the ones which are merit worthy, etc., will bump you up in the rankings of all of that stuff. Then the signals, as you say, are very clear that that's not welcome.
I mean, it translates into what counts or not. It translates into, do you get a raise or not? Do you get the job or not? Do you get tenure or not? And I think for the two of us, we're relatively privileged, right? In all kinds of ways. We have tenure.
Yeah, and it's a really important thing that we should say right off the bat too, right?
Exactly, and I think for both of us, right? There's also a sense going into this project, going into our work together now and moving forward, that we are, because of this relatively safe, it's a choice for us moving forward, right? Like what we do, and that's a position of privilege. And so, don't we have maybe can we do some good? Basically, I don't want to frame it as a duty because that's not what it feels like. But do we have maybe a responsibility, maybe an opportunity to try to,
Yeah, and I sometimes think of this in terms of the kind of cultural capital, but in the academic setting, that we have accumulated by going through all the hoops, which you and I can both do that. We know how to do that. We've done that for many years. We're pretty good at it. That's why we are where we are. By doing that, we've accumulated a certain amount of capital within that system, which we can then use. We could choose to use that in a lot of ways, right? We can choose to throw it behind gatekeeping of much the same kind that we've encountered, or we could choose to throw it behind something that kind of opens more spaces. And I feel like this project is one of my attempts to do the second thing rather than the first thing. Even though I feel like I'm pretty much constantly inundated with requests to do the gatekeeping. So I'm told all the time, you need to adjudicate these requests for funding, right? Decide who is worthy of funding, and these are our criteria, or decide who gets an A in their paper. I mean, this manifests at very, very very, very consistent ways across all of these different levels.
Mhm.
And, you know, I accept that that's part of my job to apply those rules and come up with answers. But I think maybe I'm less of a pessimist than I pretend to be sometimes. But
I
I
don't think
also
you're so
think
much of it. Yeah.
it's possible to move these categories and these rules and these norms at least a little bit, right? By doing something that we know doesn't fit within them, and yeah, taking maybe some of the flack for that, which is not very much flack. I mean, relative to what it might be like for someone who wouldn't be able to get a job if they started to do this right now.
Right. I mean, but there is flack, and
There
I
is
don't want to
flack.
not be honest about that, right? And it's definitely a risk. And when you start doing work like this, you stop getting when you start making a choice, right, to do work like this and do it publicly and move it into the spaces it's not supposed to belong. You stop getting asked to do certain kinds of things, and you start getting asked to do other kinds of things, right? So it is a choice. It's not like there are no consequences, but I think the possibilities and the joys and the wholeness, the feeling of wholeness that results
I remember a
makes
way that
those
you.
consequences.
Sorry, finish your thought.
No,
Sorry, I
go
didn't mean
on.
to
No, no,
interrupt.
no, no. I never finish a thought. So
Okay. I just
go
I
on.
was remembering a way that you once put this that I thought was amazing, and it was something like, people kept saying to me, "You're so weird. What you're doing is so weird. Stop doing it." And then I kept doing it, and then over time they started saying, "What you're doing is so weird. Come over here and do it."
Right.
And that's kind of that transition is exactly, I think, what we're both looking for,
That's
ways to
right.
make that happen.
Exactly. And so the symposium project. So we were, I think, both teaching in the same program, teaching a text or teaching the same text in this program. And at least, for me, it was definitely yes. Yeah, that text. Um, and there was a sense of frustration for lots of reasons. And, it's exhausting to be frustrated all the time. And it's exhausting to take all that energy and to dwell on the negativity and in all the ways that things aren't ideal. So, we're sitting down, I think having a couple glasses of wine, and
Oh,
really started like dwelling in the question, well, what if we just made what we wanted to make? What if we just didn't ask anyone for permission, didn't apply for funding, didn't ask anybody if they thought that this was a worthy use of time? What if we decided to spend time writing together about something we were teaching and just kind of see what happens? We never planned initially to write a book. Like that was never, I think, part of the goal. It was let's make positive time to make stuff together for its own sake and not worry about what comes next at all.
yeah, and the goallessness was important, and I think is important for the Invisible College too, right? There is no agenda here. I mean, apart from to do wonderful things that feel important to us. Um, but there was no, we didn't set out, as you say, with the intention to write a book. We didn't really set out with the thought we're going to make something that looks like this or like that, or we're going to work in fiction, or we're going to work as poets or anything. That we didn't kind of start with that kind of laundry list of limitations, which anytime you have to go to the gatekeepers for permission, for funding, for the conditions that will make what you want to do possible, you have to start with the laundry list of limitations. And even if you then go on and expand or change, that's a very different way of setting out than the way that we set out, which was just, hey, yeah, let's do it. We won't ask anyone. Again, the privilege, let's just flag it
Mm-hmm.
one more
Right.
time. We won't ask anyone. We didn't need to ask anyone. And we're going to rethink this. We're going to remake this. We're going to rework what's in this text, why it's troubling us. And if people who want to learn a little bit about what is troubling us can go check out our little dialogue in the Philosopher's Magazine. We'll have some kind of link somewhere near this video.
Right. And it's on the site, right? It's on
And
the
yeah,
symposium page of
it's
the
on
site.
the Invisible College site, and yeah, that kind of it became a kind of a wandering out into the territory, the territory that in some ways is opened up to us by this text, but but it's a text that also, to my mind, is it is and has been for like, the 2000 years that the symposium has been around, something that closes down possibilities. For example, the woman in the room gets sent out it's not even subtle, it's sent out at the beginning of the dialogue, and she's only there to provide entertainment. She's sent away when the serious stuff begins. That's our model of scholarship for 2000 years. So, and I mean, that's only the most obvious and the first example of this, but this, we had so many feelings, and we didn't want to just kind of give up, just throw the book at the wall or in the fire once we were done teaching it. We wanted to do something with that. We wanted to use that and make something out of it.
And the book is ostensibly, at least, all about dialogue. But the book also, for people who don't, who've never read Symposium, don't know much about it, in short, bunch of speeches by a bunch of dudes on a bunch of couches about love. So, but there's something there. I mean, there's something to think with. And I think there's a way when you read a text, you're making it part of yourself and you're making yourself part of it. And so that, for me, it was, how do we do that? Well, let's kind of use this dialogic mode of being and write with each other and write for each other. So we would set fungible deadlines. We would each kind of take one of the speeches, and it didn't really matter. We were pretty chill about, how that worked. And we would basically somehow use each speech as a constraint to write with. And we'd set kind of a rough deadline just to have a benchmark. But I think an important part of our work together has been really putting at the center the fact that like we're humans with minds and bodies, and like sometimes you're too tired to write. Sometimes, like you're, like you have I'm not getting out of bed day. You have I'm just going to watch The Bachelorette and like cry about nothing day. And that's real and that happens, right? And so part of our working mode is to
it's not necessarily
it's just
wrong.
like
those might be the days.
It's not convenient.
Sure. Okay. Let me rephrase that. It's not like that means you're like failing, right? It means that you're potentially, it can mean you're healing, or that you are kind of getting through a piece of time that is not meant to be a productive, in the traditional sense, piece of time. And so I think that sort of the acknowledgement and the acceptance of that has been it's been vital for me, as I've also been during this time coming to terms with things like chronic mental health issues that I just have to live with and work around. And it doesn't mean like the days that are like that don't mean that I failed all day. They just mean that was some time when that was the mode I existed in for that day. Another day, I might write all day. Wonderful, that was the mode I existed in for that day. That's fine too. And kind of just trying to kind of understand that the work, again, I'm using words that I think I got from you originally. The work nourishes us, and when it doesn't, we don't do it. That's the basic rule, right? Yeah, exactly. When it's not life-giving, it's not worth it.
Exactly. And I think totally, and that changes for me the way I work moving forward. It changes the way I teach, right? I'm much more likely now, if I'm not going to get those papers graded by Tuesday because I'm having a shitty day, frankly, and I'm just going to be honest with my students about that. Look, I'm not going to grade your stuff just because I'm having a bad day. It's going to be, and they're fine. And I think creating the larger point here is that this work has helped just in general create a space where we're all just putting the fact that we're human beings at the center and not trying to push the inconvenient fact of being human to the side so we can get on with the work. That's central to the work.
Right. And I mean, this very kind of the idea that one separates the mind from the body, just to go back to all of the great things that this has done, the whole idea that you have to separate the mind from the body, and that the mind is wonderful and basically masculine, and the body is basically, feeble and problematic and feminine. That's a big pile of problematic right there. And so, part of accepting that being a scholar doesn't mean that you put yourself on one side of that boundary and the other kind of just drifts away, or that everything related to your body and your material needs and so on is just taken care of by somebody else, which has been, again, the model for a very long time. That's part of the work too. That's part of what we're up to, what we're about, and putting
Mm-hmm.
humanness at the center is crucial. And it does affect how you relate to your students, right? So, if you're like, I also, like, sometimes I'm a couple, I don't relate with my marking. So if they're late turning something in, it's only fair for me to cut the same slack and to appreciate, yeah, sure. I mean, maybe some of them are taking advantage. Maybe some of them have had a really bad year. I don't know that
Mm-hmm.
from the outside, and I would rather be compassionate than,
Totally.
a big jerk.
That's right. And this is very much the spirit of what we're doing here as well. And so it turns out that we wound up writing a book manuscript. Like, who knew, right? Who knew? We ended up with this collection of poems slash fiction slash, but a group of speeches. And it's now someone's looking at it. And we have shared the first couple of speeches in this Philosopher's Magazine piece that's available on the site, and there's much more to come, but we're not done yet. And it feels like this is just a kind of work and being together that feels really nourishing, like really productive. And we wanted to keep doing it and expand it and share it with others. And so that's kind of where creating a space for that, some sort of space for making possible the
Necessarily in
kind
an
of
institution, like
sorry,
not necessarily physical
right,
space or in an institution. This is more like
right,
imaginary space, conceptual space,
exactly, invisible space. So the
invisible
invisible
space.
college.
So I just stumbled upon the phrase the invisible college because I was reading about Robert Boyle, the chemist, and his some of his letters apparently he referred to belonging to an invisible college or working within an invisible college. And I was like, that's weird and interesting, right? Because he wasn't talking about a brick and mortar college. He was talking about some people in other places than where he was, that he was corresponding with and he was thinking through his work with. And so that was just happened. I came across that juxtaposition of two words, invisible college, at the exact time that we were moving between, getting to a full manuscript with the symposium and thinking, okay, what now, or where now, what next? So that was how that phrase came to be the label that I think I just wrote to you something like, I texted Carla something like, hey, what if we had an invisible college? She was like,
And I was like,
yeah.
cool. And then I didn't realize until like a little bit after that where I had seen the phrase invisible college was from a comic book series called The Invisibles that I love. And I was like, yes, of course. It's serendipity. This has got to be the name for the site and the
Mentioned
space.
to you before, but I then realized also that the Unseen University in Terry Pratchett is the same thing, basically, with a verse.
Awesome.
That's my dog shaking it out back there, if
The
anyone's
best
wondering what
dog.
that
Yeah.
sounds. There she is.
The best dog
That is
who lives with the best
the
cats as
best dog in
well.
the
We
world.
should
Yeah, the
say.
cats are also here, although usually they come get involved when I'm Skyping. They're being pretty shy. There's an
So
entire little crew.
that's right. And it's a fabulous crew. And I'm sure that folks who've spent time with us at the Invisible College will meet them and learn also about them over the course
They
of
will they will get involved. They're magical
definitely.
creatures, especially the cats. I don't know what plane of reality they come from, but not mine. But I'm
So,
thinking about timing here. So
yeah.
maybe
So
we should kind
we're
of,
kind of wrap it up and where we
yeah,
go from here and then have our wine and say goodbye to everyone or say
about the
until next time.
future very
Yeah.
briefly.
So
What are we up to next, or
briefly,
where
we're
are we
going to
going?
do stuff together. We're going to have conversations that we're going to try to post semi regularly. Every week or two would be awesome. And we hope we can keep up a pace like that. And we'll just kind of see what happens with life and with being a human. But we're going to be sharing kind of conversations about issues that we're thinking about in our life and work. We're going to be sharing work in progress, some of which is going to be made specifically for the site. Like I think in the next post or the next couple of posts will be maybe a video poem, maybe another sort of essay poem, maybe some fiction. And we would like to open it for conversation for whoever wants to be part of the conversation. And you can contact us through the site.
And I think our first bundle of thinking that we've been doing is around construction. We've been thinking about the construction of spaces, opening up of spaces. Things like doors and walls and corners and things like that are floating around in our scholarly and creative minds right now. So so that's all coming up. Yeah. Do we need to say more? Maybe we don't need to say more.
I think maybe let's just say until next time for now. And thanks for watching and listening and being here with us, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Tell us what you think and things. Tell us what you think about and what you're interested in.
Cool. All right. Bye.